In today's episode, our special guest, the great writer Mike Brophy, joins myself to talk about his career and preview the second round of playoff series. We also have great guests from each city to talk Flyers, Islanders, Lightning, and Avalanche. Hit the music. Welcome to Jablam Sports Hockey, folks. I'm your host, Peter Bonjaranov, and the mic is always on. You can find me on Twitter at Russia98. You can find the full show at Jablam Sports. If you have any questions or comments, please tweet us. Use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Please subscribe to us if you haven't done so yet, and click on the three dots in your podcasting app. Share our show with three hockey fans you know. Thank you, everyone. Remember, check out our website, go to jablamsports.com, see all our podcasts, and even game notes for each episode. You'll get links to all the things we mentioned on this show, including guests. For our podcasts, click on podcasts, and then hockey on this show specifically right on our website. Time for some Trending Now. I'm proud to have on the show for Trending Now this week is the great Mike Brophy. You know him for his terrific work as a writer for the Hockey News and, of course, as sports writer and analyst on Sirius XM, Sportsnet, and CBC, among others. You can find him on Twitter if you like, at HockeyBrof. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Perfect. All right, so before we get into maybe some playoff hockey talk, for myself, too, as a person who's trying to get more into, sports journalism and broadcasting and everything, my first question for yourself is, how did you get into becoming, and what was your drive into becoming a hockey writer?
It's really interesting. As you can tell behind me, I'm a big music fan. Mm-hmm. And I was 18 years old, and I was up in my bedroom living at home and listening to Pink Floyd. And my mother came into the room and said, there's an ad in the local paper, the Burlington Gazette, looking for a part-time sports reporter. Why don't you give them a call? So I called the sports editor, Larry Robertson, and he knew who I was because I played rep hockey, football, and softball. And he gave me a shot. And, I went to University McMaster. I took business for 2 years, and then my standard line is I realized I had no business being there, so I quit. And became a full-time sports writer. And, I was in Burlington for about a year and a half. Then I got a gig working at the Peterborough Examiner, a daily newspaper covering the Peterborough Peach for 14 years. Nice. So, I just considered myself blessed. Absolutely. When I was a kid growing up in Burlington, I used to be a huge fan of the Hamilton Red Wings. And when their games were always on CHTV, and then they'd replay them again Sunday morning. So I'd watch it again. And after every game, a reporter from the Hamilton Spectator called Joe Watkins would come on and pick the 3 stars. And I thought he had the best job in the world, going to hockey games, getting to go on TV and radio and pick the 3 stars. And for 14 years in Peterborough, I got to go on the radio with Bill Bennett after the game and pick the 3 stars.
Sweet. That sounds great. For myself, maybe I'm nitpicking a little bit, but what would you recommend for a person like myself or other people just coming straight out of college to work on in terms of, becoming, getting their name out or just getting out there and getting work?
Well, I was very fortunate when I started my career. There was no such thing as social media. So, you just go to the game, write the story, and that was it. But yeah. I think now I noticed the next wave, the young wave of sports people, they really sell themselves and they do a great job. For an old timer like myself, it really took a lot of work because we just weren't used to doing that, and, but I noticed, like Chris Stevenson with Sportsnet or Sean McKenzie, these guys just do a terrific job of selling themselves and making themselves available. When I worked at the Hockey News, which I was the senior writer there for 17 years, I would always tell interns, the word no is not in your vocabulary. If you've got a date with Miss World tonight, but somebody asks you, put the date off and go cover a junior C hockey game. Go and cover the hockey game. You know, that's your priority has to be selling yourself and doing your job. I was lucky that I didn't have a journalism degree. And, you know, many of the times I went for jobs, I was up against guys who had journalism degrees. But I always told the boss, whoever it might be, I will outwork anybody. You take me over this other guy and I will outwork him in a heartbeat. And that was kind of my ticket.
Sounds great. What was a career highlight for you?
Oh boy, you know, I think I covered around 17 Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
Certainly the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City when Canada won the women's gold and the men's gold. That was great. But probably the single best event I was ever at was Game 7 of the 1994 Stanley Cup final. It was Game 7, the Rangers against the Vancouver Canucks in New York City, and the Rangers hadn't won the Cup for 54 years, something Maple Leaf fans can sympathize with. But, you know, being at that Game 7 was – and the funny part about that was at the start of the year in the Hockey News yearbook, even though the Rangers hadn't made the playoffs the year before, I picked them to win the Stanley Cup. I thought the combination of getting Mike Keenan in as a coach, combined with the talent they had, and of course they made a few solid trades along the way. And so I remember going into the Rangers dressing room after they won, and about 3 of the players grabbed me and said, "You were the only guy who picked us to win the Cup." And I'm thinking to myself, man, you just won the Stanley Cup, and that's what's on your mind right now? It was crazy.
Because that's probably wall material for them, right? With all the other guys that are not, you know, thinking about them. And was that the year when Messier made the pledge? The prediction?
Yeah. That was in the semifinal against New Jersey Devils.
Yeah. Great. All right, let's get into a little bit of playoff talk. Right now in the East, we got Philadelphia versus the Isles. A lot of people think this might be a bit of a snooze series, especially with how everything went in the first round. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's a lot being written now how the New York Islanders, and obviously managed by Lou Lamoriello, are very much like the old New Jersey Devils. So they suck the life out of the game, and, you know, it's strictly defensive mode. And I think you can make a strong case for that. That said, you know, I give this organization, and it comes down to Lou and obviously Barry Trotz, the coach. I give them a lot of credit for turning the program around in a hurry. And I know, like, my wife Marilyn and I watched all the games together, and she can't stand watching the New York Islanders because she says they're just so bloody boring in today's day and age with wide open hockey. But sometimes you got to play the hand you're dealt. And if you don't have a lot of offensive players, then you'd better play solid defensive hockey. And that's what they're doing. It's going to be interesting to see what the Philadelphia Flyers can do against them, because I think Philly's got a pretty solid offensive hockey team with a lot of depth, and they play with a lot of discipline, and they're getting decent goaltending. So it could be a good series. How much I'll pay attention to it as it's being shown live, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, for sure. Philadelphia and Dallas reminds me of a team that are trying to adapt to their oppositions in terms of playing style, especially with Dallas playing very defensive during the season and then kind of changing it up in the first round, and Philadelphia kind of doing the opposite, whereas they were very offensive near the end where the stoppage of play, and then they played a very defensive first round.
They really do. They put I can't tell you, when I was watching the last game, you would go 10 or 15 minutes and not even notice Claude Giroux in the offensive zone. He was thinking about defense, and he's one of their most gifted offensive players. So they really did change their game. That's a good observation by you. And because they're big, typical Philadelphia, they grind you down. And when they get the goaltending, which has been a problem over the years with that organization, they're a pretty hard team to play against.
Yeah, they sure are. All right, next up, Tampa, Boston. This could be, or maybe, you know what? It should be the conference final if you think about it. I have no clue who's really going to win this series, but I have a slight edge to the Bruins, unless Stamkos maybe comes back. We'll see.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because, you put Stamkos in the lineup and their whole power play changes, right? he's the trigger man on that. And suddenly Kucherov's a better hockey player too, because he's such a good setup man. Right now, if he doesn't come back, I like Boston's chances. The only thing I worry about is the scheduling, where twice they have to play on back-to-back nights, and you've got a 38-year-old goaltender going on back-to-back nights. That could be a bit of a challenge for Halak.
Yeah, I'm still surprised, and it irks me that Bruins can sign these guys for such low cap hits, like their top line, and even Halak, who technically should be maybe a number one goalie anywhere else around the league, but they have him signed to a great cap hit, like as a backup, and he's stellar.
Yeah, he really is. He's solid. He gives you a lot of confidence. When you lose a Tuukka Rask the way they did, he had to go home, and I guess one of his daughters was ill.
Yeah.
That's for anybody, other organization, that could be absolutely devastating. And Boston just didn't even seem to skip a beat when that happened. And Halak comes in, and the first game he played, he gives the puck away, and that was a major blooper on his part. But if he just stays in his net and worries about stopping the puck and not playing it too much, I think he's a pretty dependable guy.
Mm-hmm. I think the Rangers. I think the Bruins just signed one of their string goaltenders. So I find that kind of peculiar at this time to kind of do that. I don't know. Is maybe some of that with what happened with Tuukka maybe, bothering some of the other Bruins nation or maybe even media members?
Well, I don't know. Hockey's renowned as a team sport. When one guy pulls a shoot, and I don't think there's anybody in today's world that would, publicly criticize Tuukka Rask for going home to be with his family. His wife calls him. She's in a panic. One of the girls is sick, and he goes home. I don't know how you could possibly criticize that, but I can tell you behind closed doors, there would be a few eyebrows raised. I personally hold nothing against Tuukka Rask. Boston was my pick to come out of the East. So in my pool, it kind of hurt losing Tuukka Rask. But from a humanity side of it, it's a no-brainer. Of course he had to leave the team.
Yeah, good for Tuukka. I actually picked the Flyers, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, my wife picked the Flyers too.
All right, so let's go to the West. Colorado versus Dallas. And again, Dallas kind of playing more the up-tempo game now, these playoffs. And that first game, I don't know, that was kind of surprising, wasn't it?
It really was. I've got Colorado winning the Stanley Cup this year. So I obviously, in my boxes, I picked every Colorado player I could. And the reality is when you're in a hockey pool, you don't want your teams to win in 4 straight, do you? You want to get as many games in as you can. Yeah. So you can greedily get the points. But this is a really, really good series. And I've got to say, I've known Rick Bowness for a lot of years. And he's one of the nicer men that I've met in hockey. So I'm really, really pleased to see him enjoying some success late in his career, but at the same time, I love Nathan MacKinnon. There's just so much to like about Colorado. Their skill, their speed, their determination. They play the game the right way, and I think this is going to be a long 7-game series.
Yeah, I was surprised how entertaining that first round was with Dallas and the Flames. And now this is going to be entertaining as well. Like you said, McKinnon is there. And good on Joe Sakic to really pick up and get a whole amazing second line led with Nazem Kadri and the rest of those guys. So yeah,
it's interesting. I covered the Leafs for a lot of years, and I got to know Nazem really well. And there's people now, hindsight being 2020, saying Nazem Kadri is exactly what the Maple Leafs need. They need that sandpaper, but we can't forget the fact that Nazem took suspensions at the worst time of the year and he hurt his team. And again, I like Nazem Kadri. I love watching him play. There's an innocence to his game. There's an old school feeling about his hockey game. I think he could have played in the original 6 because he's got sandpaper in his game. Yeah. And it's nice to see him succeeding in Colorado, but at some point the Leafs, they just couldn't let him keep doing what he was doing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yet they miss him.
Yeah, you know what? And I said I didn't like the trade immediately because I knew that that's the type of player that the Leafs are missing. Yeah. And I was even saying, I'll tell you, Mike, 2 years ago, I was saying, maybe it would be nice if the Leafs could trade Mitch Marner for Matthew Tkachuk. So
yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah, it's just that type of player. It's just that type
of
player.
Well, when they got beat out this year, I compared them to a boy band. Like I call them soft kids on the block.
Yeah.
And they're going up against Metallica. And they just don't have enough men in that team right now.
Yeah.
They're too cute, and they play the game like boys play it. And we all know, if you watch hockey, this is a man's league. And sure, we can all point to the fact that sure, it's younger players are more successful now than they've ever been.
Yeah.
But when you get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, if you don't have grit, and if you don't have that determination to pay a price for victory, you're not going to go far. And so far, the Maple Leafs do not have that type of a chemistry.
Do you think, Tampa Bay, especially with this core, they haven't gone all the way yet. And maybe Washington is a bit of an example of Ovechkin and his career. Maybe the Maple Leafs are that kind of team that they just need way more experience, and to get that into their, younger heads, that they need to play more of that game. And it's just going to take a grind. It's going to take a couple years. And with the salary cap, it might be tough for them.
It's going to be tough, but they're going to have to make a trade. It's either got to be Marner or it's got to be Nylander. One of those guys has to go, and you need to bring some grit back. I look at Washington, and who's one of the most important players. I mean, it's a given that Ovi's the most important guy, but next on the list might be Tom Wilson. Mm-hmm. The guy can play the game. He steps over the line, probably too much for a lot of people, but he's a guy who plays with grit, plays with toughness, and he can play a regular shift. And that's what the Maple Leafs need.
We went off base here. Let's go back to the West.
Funny how it always turns into a Maple Leafs discussion, isn't it?
Always. All right. Vegas versus Vancouver. Oh, man. First off, let's just go straight to that Alan Walsh tweet. All right?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Like, I can't recall ever seeing an agent do something like this. I guess it's a new day and age with social media, but posting a picture in the middle of the playoffs that basically you're not thrilled that your goaltender, who's still got a couple more years left on that contract, and you're posting an image of him getting stabbed in the back by the coach, not playing.
Yeah, it was very extreme. And I on some level, I really like that Alan's always out there promoting his players. I follow him on Twitter. I think he does a great job. I think even he would agree that he probably went too far on this one. Mm-hmm. And Marc-Andre Fleury, thank heavens, reined it in a hurry. If Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't publicly answer to that tweet, mm-hmm. then I think you've got the potential for a lot of resentment to suddenly creep into the dressing room. And at this time of year, that is the absolute last thing you need. Again, I'll defend Alan Walsh for supporting his players. I think in this instance, his timing was bad, and he just went too far.
Yeah. I don't know. Fleury's answer was a little bit middle of the road. He didn't say about if it was his reasoning or if it was like totally Adam Walsh, and I guess you don't want to throw your own agent under the bus, right? So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. But they look good in their first game. I picked Vegas to actually win the cup as well. I have Colorado. It irks me because in my hockey pool, all the other groups didn't take Vegas until later, and I was like, all right, I'm going to take Vegas later. And in my group, of course, they took Vegas early, and I was like, oh my God. So at least I got a lot of Colorado players. They're my second to come out of the West. We'll see. I still think Vegas is going to take out the Canucks in like 5 games.
Yeah, you know what? Vancouver might be a year or two away. I mean, I love their skill, their speed, their skill. I can't believe the great job Travis Greene is doing coaching this hockey team. Mm-hmm. And, as far as pure entertainment goes, they might be the most entertaining group going right now. But I just think they're not quite ready. And, hey, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong in this one, I'll say I'd be happy to be wrong because I'd like to see another cup come back to Canada. Mm-hmm. But I just think they're a year or two away from being a real super dominant hockey team.
Yeah, I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I really wanted that first overall Lafreniere to maybe go to Montreal, but my second one was hoping Vancouver would take it just because I love that young core, and maybe he would have put them maybe too much over the edge, but we'll see how he looks in a Rangers jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, if I were the Rangers, I don't think he's a generational player. I think he's a very good hockey player. I think he's very deserving of the nod to be the number one player selected in the draft. But this is a pretty good draft. And if I could get the third and fifth picks, I would seriously entertain that, because the Rangers are an emerging hockey team right now. So to add players at 3 and 5, that'd be hard to turn down.
For sure. So you did pick, I just want to go back to this. You did pick the Avs to go all the way. So you think Vegas will lose to probably the Avalanche in the next round? I don't know.
It's a coin toss. Yeah. It's a coin toss on that one because I really respect the Vegas organization and I think they've got a great team. I just thought that Colorado was riding a wave. And sometimes it comes down to who's the best player in the series, and Nathan MacKinnon to me is the best player. So that's kind of why I gave them the edge.
Yep, perfect. Again, you can find him on Twitter if you'd like, at HockeyBrophy. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Mike, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me on.
That was a great chat I had with Mike. It's insightful how times have changed in sports journalism and so fun talking hockey with him. Next up are our in-depth interviews with Anthony SanFilippo talking Flyers, Christian Arnold with some Isles talk, Ian St.Clair and I find out if the Avalanche can turn this thing around in this series, and with Erik Erlendsson going over the Bolts. Now we have on the show Ian St.Clair. He's the lead writer at Colorado Play. You can find the website playcolorado.com and the Twitter account for that at Colorado_play. You can also find him on Twitter at Ian St.Clair. Ian, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. Appreciate it.
So we were talking just beforehand. You're saying this is a must-win game already for Game 2, eh?
I absolutely think so, because when you look back, one of the most successful coaches in NHL history, Scotty Bowman, always said the most important game in any series is Game 2. Mm-hmm. Because if you win Game 1, that sets you up to basically need to just win 2 games of the remaining, however, if it goes 7 games, mm-hmm. to win the series. But if you lose Game 1, as the Avs did to the Dallas Stars, then that puts you back in it and makes it a series. So I think this is the time for the Avalanche to show whether or not that was an anomaly in Game 1, mm-hmm. or whether they can respond to what Jared Bednar said and come out and actually play like they expect and as they should play in a playoff series like this.
I think it was kind of odd for them as well. They had the weird round robin thing, and then they had a team like the Coyotes that were easily for them. They handled them fairly easily, and now they hit a tough and actual contender type team in the Stars. So I think it's a first game, it's a feeling out process, and it's the playoffs. It's a bit of a run, and you got to win those 4 games. So
absolutely, and the thing that stands out about that Coyotes series mm-hmm. is through the first 3 games, they were able to throw a lot of shots at Darcy Kemper, but they didn't have a lot of success. Mm-hmm. And the Coyotes were able to do what Dallas did in Game 1, and that's just make it a grinded out series. Like they really limited the chances mm-hmm. for Colorado. I mean, especially in those first 3 games against Arizona, they got a lot of shots, but I don't know if they were really quality chances.
Yeah.
And that's what Dallas did in Game 1. Obviously Nathan MacKinnon and that top line went off, but as Bednar said, the rest of the guys didn't show up. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be what's key to this. Obviously you want that top line to show up, but that's one of the reasons that Joe Sakic traded Tyson Barrie to Toronto for Nazem Kadri, is to get that depth scoring, and they need that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they respond to some adversity, because after that Game 3 loss to Arizona, they come out and they wallop Arizona 14-2 in the next 2 games.
Yeah.
Are they going to be able to do that again, or is Dallas going to be able to really make this a grinded, physical out series?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Nazem Kadri. I'm a Leaf fan. I know his history. I love him. He's finding spots in front of net, and you notice that, especially on the power play in that first round. But again, I'm afraid, as a Leaf fan, if they get behind the 8 ball, then Nazem tries to play a little bit more uber aggressive. He goes into a different mode, and starts going, instead of focusing more on getting the puck up the ice and getting the puck on net and finishing on rebounds, he gets uber aggressive and starts just going after players. And again, you already kind of saw that in that first game against Dallas.
Yeah, he gets frustrated. I think that's what you see from all the guys is that frustration starts to build over. Hopefully they're able to table that. I think what will help is to have a strong spark to game 2. When the puck drops, just come out and be on top of it. Because I think that's what sets the Avs up, is if they have a strong start, then that sets the mode for the rest of the game. Because the thing about this team, and it's maddening at times, is it's so inconsistent. Because they'll show up like they did in those 2 games to close out Arizona, and then they'll have what they did against Dallas in game 1. So I think that's where you need to see them come out and have a strong start, because then if they're flying and they're playing their game and they set the tone instead of letting Dallas set the tone, that's what will curb some of that frustration from Nazem Kadri. And I think one of the big players, one of the big pieces who wasn't in the game in game 1 is Matt Calvert. I think the fact that he wasn't in the lineup, he's a tone setter too for this team. He adds that speed and physicality on that fourth line with Matt Nieto and Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. So if he can go, that will be a big piece that was missing. So we'll see. But a strong start is very important for this team.
You mentioned Matt Calvert's injury, but how about Grubauer? It looked kind of gruesome, especially his reaction. And is he even maybe capable of ever coming back, or is it Frank Kuz's team for the rest of the way?
It's one of those injuries where it doesn't seem like when you watch the replay that it was that bad, but obviously it was, for him to be just laid out on the ice and unable to put anything on his left leg. I mean, it was just it was difficult to watch, just from not from a sports or an Avalanche fan standpoint, from just a human element of it, to see a guy labor like that. But I don't know if he's going to be able to come back. Obviously, hockey players are a different breed, and especially when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I think they're going to have to roll with Pavel Francouz. And if he's able to give them anything in net, he's going to have to do it, because it's his team now. I don't think that the Avalanche are going to be able to rely on Grubauer coming back.
Yeah. Sorry for butchering Francouz's name. All right. Well, the other one little thing I want to talk about was Dallas played very well in the opening round, especially offensively, without their top line. But that first game, we saw what their top line can do. How can they stop maybe that threat now if they get that second gear?
I think what Bednar has to do is stop matching up his third line with that top line of Jamie Benn, Taylor Seguin, and Radulov. Go matched up. Go fire for fire. Put Landeskog, Rantanen, and McKinnon on the line against Benn, Seguin, and Radulov. I think that's one thing that I have a question with Bednar, and this happened in the first round series with Rick Tocchet. He tends to be outmatched in his lineup matchups, and I think while I get you want to put your checking line against that top line, you have depth. So Dallas doesn't. So match up your top line against their top line. And if they want to throw out Pavelski and his line, put Nazem Kadri out there against that line. See, I mean, you have depth for a reason. Use it. And force the Dallas Stars to then decide, well, what are we going to do now? Because you have the advantage, even though they're in the bubble and there's not home ice, the Avs still have the advantage of the last change. So take advantage of it. So match firepower. If they want to roll that top line, throw out McKinnon, Landeskog, and McKinnon. Yeah. And I mean, arguably the best line in hockey. Obviously, there's that line in Boston. But I mean, there's a reason this line. I mean, and they were rolling in game 1. Yeah. So if you want to counter how that top line performed, match it up.
So in Boston, you mentioned they have the perfection line. What is the name of McKinnon's line? Did they have one?
I don't think there is one yet.
Come on, we got to make one, Ian. Let's do it.
So you have Landeskog, you have Rantanen, and you have McKinnon. Obviously the driver is McKinnon.
Mm-hmm.
So putting me on the spot. Part of me wants to go with tying in Rantanen's nickname of the Moose.
Yeah.
So maybe the Moose line. I don't know. McKinnon and company, or
he didn't play for the Halifax Mooseheads, right? No, McKinnon. Close. He's close to there at least. Something on those lines. We'll have to think about that. We'll have to come up with a name, Ian. We'll figure it out on Twitter. Ian, thank you again for coming on the show at Ian St.Clair. That was great talking to you again, Ian. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Now let's talk some Lightning and how better to do that than ask a weather expert. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones on the ice. All right, let's talk to the best individual for the job, the Lightning insider, Erik Erlendsson. He covers Lightning. You can find his website at lightninginsider.com. And, of course, he's the host of Lightning Radio Monday to Fridays, right? 12 to 1, but is it still going on right now?
Actually, it's not, but I do have a podcast under the same name. So
perfect. So they can follow you there, and they can also follow you on Twitter at Erik_Erlendsson. Erik, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate you having me back on.
Cool. So Lightning got past their old demons of the first round last year after the sweep, and they beat the Blue Jackets in as well short games this year within 5 games. Now next on the plate are the Bruins in what should possibly or probably be, you would think, in terms of, everybody all mixed up going into the different rounds, into the second round, highest versus lowest, but it all seems like they're all against each other within divisions again, and they're facing the Bruins again in the second round anyways.
Yeah, I guess in a perfect world, that's probably hopefully would have ended up being anyway, right? Depending on how Tampa Bay would have matched up against the Maple Leafs, that they were on the collision course for the first round. But, we didn't get the matchup last year that we were hoping for between Boston and Tampa Bay. We got it 2 years ago. So it just seems, as somebody said, in a world that's abnormal right now, this feels pretty normal when it comes to the NHL, that Boston and Tampa Bay are going to face off in the playoffs because they were just on that collision course. The top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference, really the last 2 years, they've been the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference in terms of record. So pretty even match series, I think, in a lot of ways, and this one should go the distance.
Let me straight up ask you, can the Bolts beat Boston without Steven Stamkos?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
Certainly it helps to have him, but the strength of this team is their depth. And while they don't have anybody that can do what Steven Stamkos does, especially on the power play, and he's actually turned into their best face-off performer, especially in that right dot. But they have the depth to do it. In 2016, they were able to get through the first 2 rounds of the postseason and got to a Game 7 against Pittsburgh in the conference finals when he was dealing with the blood clot injury or the situation, and then they had the blood thinners that he was on. So, yes, they can do it. The task is more difficult, obviously, without him, but the strength of this team has been their depth, and especially at the forward position.
Is there any update still, or no? Nothing at all?
There's nothing. It's the life we're in right now in terms of the media standpoint, right? We don't get to see practices. There's nobody attending practices. The team has shut down information on anything. We don't even get practice updates anymore. And John Cooper has decreed that we don't ask questions about Steven Stamkos. So status quo until we're told otherwise.
I think the schedule is so compact that they don't even have much of a schedule to fit in any large practices either right now, right? Like the first round finished and it went straight to the second round. Usually there's like 7 games set up, even though some of the series were like 4, 5, 6 games. And then they went straight into the second round. That's more of an NBA thing, not an NHL thing. And now we're seeing compacted series like back-to-backs way more frequently. So they're in a rush to get it all done and get ready for the next season as well. So even practices are few and far between.
this is where the Montreal Canadiens let us all down, right? Had they forced a Game 7, there was only one matchup that was set, and that was a Dallas-Colorado. Had Montreal beat Philadelphia and forced a Game 7 on Sunday, we would have had to wait until Tuesday, when Game 1 of the second round would have been. But I mean, look, under the circumstances, you want to accelerate it, I think, but it is unusual to have not just one back-to-backs, but two back-to-backs, and it's not unprecedented. You know, the Lightning actually had a home back-to-back against the Canadiens back in 2015. Games 3 and 4 in Tampa were actually on back-to-back nights. So it does happen usually because of building situations. But in this case, there's no travel. Everybody's in the same situation. Yep. I guess it makes sense in that aspect, but that's a lot to ask of the players who haven't played for 5 months to now they're a month into this for sure. But that's a lot when you're talking about the potential 2 back-to-backs within a 7-game series. 7 games in 11 days. That's a lot of hockey.
Yep, it sure is. And you know who's looked great is Tyler Johnson and Brayden Point. Wow, he must be the go-to guy now, especially with those big OT goals.
Yeah, he's been a fascinating story to watch come up. You know, his draft year, everybody looked at him because he was too small, and skating was a little bit of an issue his draft year, and so he kind of got passed over, and Tampa Bay picks him in the 3rd round. The next year, he's kind of a 13th basically forward on Team Canada for the World Juniors. I forget who was injured, but then he had to step in and performed well in a top-line role. The next year, he was the captain. All of a sudden, he shows up at training camp that 3rd year, and you're like, wow, where did this kid come from? He just looks to be in the right position all the time. His skating had improved by leaps and bounds, and it was really noticeable. And now he's turned into a clutch guy. I mean, he's our number 1 center. His emergence, along with Anthony Cirelli, I think we talked last time, has pushed Steven Stamkos to the wing. And you just look at the importance that Brayden Point has. We just watch him during these playoffs. He's just a marvel to watch. He's not a Nathan McKinnon. He's not one of those guys, but he's just the way he skates, and he can just kind of shimmy his way. And he uses, you know, he had the double hip surgery in the offseason, you know, that kind of hindered him last year. Boy, you can tell he's healthy this year just with some of the moves that he makes. He's so elusive. He's so shifty with the puck. And to be on a line with Nikita Kucherov, those two are very dangerous together. And he has certainly put himself into Lightning lore as a player who now scored 2 overtime goals in the same playoff series. I think that's the 8th player. I think I read that right. The 8th player in NHL history to have 2 overtime goals within the same series. Yeah. And I believe only 2 other players have had 3 overtime goals in the same playoffs. So there's still some potential magic for him to create.
People will always remember that 5 OT goal. I still remember, I think it was the Keith Primo goal with the Flyers. 2001.
I think it was 2000.
Yeah.
Wow. A long time ago.
Yep. I remember. It was a good night drinking.
If you remember it, maybe it wasn't that good of a night.
It was a long night. I had to make sure it was evened out. All right. So what's going on with Sergachev? It just seems like things aren't fully going out his way. I think with the Bruins matchup, he might get his feistiness back a little bit.
Yeah, that's part of his game that kind of came on in the second half of the year. You know, he was kind of, you know, his 3rd-year pro now. He was kind of sheltered a little bit as they tried to want to get his game on. And, you know, remember the magic number for defensemen is what, 250, 300 games, somewhere in that range before they start to quote unquote figure it out. He's a little ahead of that curve because the leaps that he took this year were just spectacular in terms of his role, in terms of what he's been able to figure out that he can do. And, you know, his ice time has gone up because of it. And, you know, now the Lightning without potentially Ryan McDonagh, you know, he missed Game 2 and Sergachev is going to get his role bumped up because of that. For certainly Victor Hedman will take on some more ice time as he gets mixed and matched, but Sergachev is going to see his role increase a little bit. And, you know, he's got that feistiness to his game. We saw that come out this year. He can be an agitating kind of player because he's got so much confidence that some would say borderlines on cockiness at sometimes. But he can be an X factor. He's so good along the blue line, his own blue line with the puck, that's where he can make a difference. But he's gotten so much better in the second half in his own zone, in the defensive zone, and that's why he's continued to get more ice time. He's on the penalty kill a little bit more now than he used to be. So you're just seeing a young player starting to mature a little bit and figure out what kind of a player he is.
Mm-hmm. Tampa's power play. During the regular season, they were top 5 in the league. And now, among the teams remaining at least, they're the second worst. What needs to be fixed? I know it would be great to have Stamkos back, but right now with who they have on the ice and on the roster, what needs to change?
Well, it's even worse when you just break it down to the actual playoff games, right? Like they're 0 for 13 through the first 6 games of their playoffs, if you don't count the round robin.
Yeah.
And that's something that can't continue. I mean, you can survive without a power play that produces a lot, but at some point you got to produce. You know, look at game 1. Bruins got a power play goal. The Lightning didn't. Ended up a 1-goal game. So you have to find a way to get it moving. There's no doubt that they missed Stamkos there in that circle from that spot. They've been trying to run the same system on the power play with Sergachev at the top instead of Hedman, Kucherov over on the right circle, but they can't find anybody that is even a threat that teams respect enough to worry about it. They're cheating over to Kucherov on that spot. So, you know, they tried a Brayden Point, they tried Tyler Johnson, they tried Ondrej Palat in that spot, and they just can't find the right work to make it successful. And the second unit has had some success. They haven't scored, obviously. They've had some success, but I don't know. You've got to try something. Maybe bring Victor Hedman back to the top unit and see if that sparks something, or, you know, maybe try and run different plays. But the other problem with that is, okay, they haven't had a lot of time to work on it in games because they've only had 13 opportunities through 6 games. And then the schedule we talked about, there's not a lot of time to practice. So they can't go to a practice and work on it. You know, that 5 overtime game is still having some residual effects on the team, even 2 weeks later, because they've had to cut back on practice time just to let the guys rest and recover. So just a lot of variables working against Tampa Bay in that aspect. But so what? You got to go out and produce. You got to find a way to do something to make it work, because if this team's not going to at least be a threat on the power play, then a team like Boston's not going to be afraid to maybe take a few extra liberties against them if there's no threat. That's
for sure. Again, you can find him on Twitter at Erik_Erlendsson. Erik, thank you for coming back on the show.
My pleasure, Peter. It's good to talk to you again.
All right, let's talk some Flyers. Now we have Anthony SanFilippo on the show. He's a writer for CrossingBroad.com and the co-host of Snow the Goalie podcast. You can find him on Twitter at SanAndPhilly. Anthony, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Pete. I'm always happy to be on your program.
Flyers closed out the Habs in 6 games during that first round. Very low-scoring series, especially shutting down the Canadiens in games 3 and 4. The low-scoring and maybe boring style, you could say, is that more because of Carter Hart or a new system Alain Vigneault kind of has put in place for these playoffs?
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things. Carter Hart, for sure. I mean, he had a great series. He had 2 shutouts, youngest goalie in the modern era of the NHL to have back-to-back shutouts in a playoff. And he's been really, really solid, with the exception of, you know, 1 goal here or there. I kind of thought maybe game 5 against Montreal, he wasn't at his best. But other than that, I thought he had a really, really good series. Alain Vigneault's system is also very defense first. I mean, that's how what he preaches. You play good defense and you create your offensive opportunities out of good defensive posture, right? So that's something that Alain preaches. So it's a little bit of that as well. But I'll tell you, it's another thing. It's the third part of it has to do with the opposition, and the Canadiens did a really nice job of limiting the Flyers' offensive chances. And Flyers struggled to score goals. Power play was not good in that series. They only scored 11 goals in 6 games. So, you know, I think credit needs to be given all the way around. I think the Canadiens played a pretty strong series against the Flyers. So I'd say that's part of the offensive. I'd say it's probably 33% of each, right? Of good goaltending, good team defense by the Flyers, but also really good goaltending and team defense by the Canadiens as well that kept it a low-scoring series.
Yeah, now you have another team is kind of the same way, but they roll all 4 lines, and then they have a tactician in Barry Trotz behind the net who he gets the best and everything out of his players.
Yeah, and the Islanders are a scarier team than Montreal for the Flyers, because while they play a similar style in the sense of they pressure the puck and they come after you, one of the things I think that they do different than Montreal is they play a more heavier game, and they also play a more precision-oriented game. And by that I mean Montreal would pressure you, but they would take chances that their pressure is built off of speed and that they could recover from it if they overcommit. The Islanders are not a speed-oriented team, other than Matthew Barzal, obviously, who we know is one of the fastest skaters in the NHL. But the whole team, the team in general, is not a fast team. They're a big, strong, precise team, and they have a very unique system that Barry Trotz puts in place, in the sense that if once one guy pressures the puck, if he's not successful, he rotates back and the next guy comes in, and it's a very, very systematic process for these guys that they are that they really make it difficult for a team to even move the puck out of their own zone. And as we saw in Game 1, Peter, the Flyers really struggled to get the break out of their own zone, and that was mostly because of the Islanders' forecheck and how relentless it was.
Yeah, we really noticed offensively, Travis Konechny, Claude Giroux, and even Coots, they've gone fairly cold, I'd say, these playoffs. Not much goals, especially from Giroux.
Yeah, it's something that's been kind of brewing for a while, and I think fans have been saying, why aren't our top scorers scoring? And you can kind of say, listen, it doesn't matter when you're winning, right? It doesn't matter who's scoring when you're winning, but when you're losing, those guys get the spotlight put on them first and foremost. They all have to start being better. I felt like Giroux had a decent Game 1. Second and third period anyway. Nobody was good in that first period. First period was a disaster for the Flyers. But second and third period, I thought Giroux was okay. I thought Konechny was okay. Couturier still looks a little off to me. And it's not just on the offensive end, Peter. Here's a guy who's a Selke Trophy finalist who, on the third Islanders goal, which is really the backbreaker, he loses coverage on J.G. Pajot in front of the net, and he just kind of gets caught in no man's land. That is so uncharacteristic for Couturier. He's usually the most responsible player on the ice defensively. And to do that really kind of makes you wonder where his head is at right now, and if he's really feeling the pressure of the fact that he's not producing on the other end, and if it's impacting his game all the way around. Yeah,
maybe there's some females distracting his attention in there. Sorry, I had to give a jab at Milbury there.
The interesting thing is, it's funny you say that, but the interesting thing is, and in all honesty, if we want to be fair here, all these players are away from their families. They're there for over a month at this point. And Sean Couturier, right before he went to the bubble in Toronto, had a baby for the first time. So his wife and baby are at home. And that's got to be could be weighing on his mind. And, as a parent myself, I can tell you that I used to hate when I was traveling from city to city for these hockey games and not seeing my kids. Right. So that's just as a writer. I can only imagine what it's like to be an athlete who is away from his family 30 consecutive days and doesn't know how long he's going to be away. I mean, that's got to be weighing on him. And Giroux's kind of in the same boat too. Giroux's, child is a little bit older, but not much. And so the same thing has to be thought of there. We don't really think about a lot of times about the human side of these players. We think of them as just athletes who we are there for our entertainment, right? But they are human too. And so, I wonder if some of that stuff does creep in and does bother them a little bit. I don't know. Maybe it does.
I think a lot of people don't notice that not everybody is 19, 20, 21 years old that's partying and having a great time in these hotel rooms. There's a lot of guys that are the veteran guys, and they have families and they have children that they're away from. And it's a mental game now because they're stuck in this bubble, and it's been that long that some of them aren't going to, have their full concentration and focus on every single minute of every single game. So it's going to dwell on them, and that's one of the reasons why it's not just, are they going to be in contact with the virus or not, but it's also in terms of everything else, what's going on. So it's a tough strain for them.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that this is, a real social experiment as much as it is an athletic endeavor. You're putting, 52 member traveling parties I'd say 98% of those people are men. And you're saying you get stuck in a 4-block radius for the better part of 3 months and see how you survive and see how you live, without the normalcy of your life available to you. And I think that that's a difficult thing in and of itself, never mind the fact that you're playing for the Stanley Cup, which is the hardest trophy in professional sports to win to begin with. So, I mean, it really takes another level of mental strength, I think, to really approach this, not just for the Flyers or the Islanders, but for all the teams that were up there in the bubble.
I think the NHL might be missing out on something here. Why can't we have some internal cameras and kind of like professional sports Big Brother for the NBA and the NHL, and they have cameras following them in hotel rooms and the training centers and stuff like this? They might be missing out. At least maybe a 30 for 30, a documentary about what's going on.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe they have something like that going on. Maybe there are cameras following them around, and that a year from now we'll have something that shows up on ESPN or HBO or something along those lines, kind of look back at the bubble and what took place in the bubble. That would be kind of an interesting bit of behind the curtain insight that we don't normally get.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get back a little bit to the Flyers roster. I think that one guy that not a lot of people have talked about but has looked very steady on the back end is Philip Myers. Really good back end. He's leading with the team in like hits and plus minus. He's done a great job.
Yeah, he's grown up a lot over the pause. I mean, he grew up a lot into the season. I don't want to make it, sell him short from what he was doing in the season, but there were still certain little inconsistencies to his game. As well as he was playing, it was like, okay, that's inexperience showing there. That's inexperience showing there. He'll learn not to do that next time. But since we got back from into the bubble, Phil Myers has been, behind Provorov, probably the second best Flyers defenseman. He's got a little bit of an edge to him, too, which we didn't really see much of during the season. But in the playoffs, it's been there. He plays a much more physical game now, which he should with his size. He's got a very good shot. He's an excellent skater. It's amazing to me that when you see the talent that he has, that he went undrafted by all 31 teams. It blows my mind that nobody thought, hey, I'll take a flyer on this kid in 6th, 7th round and hopefully he develops for us. But to go completely undrafted, I don't know what was missing back then, but it's sure there now. And he's certainly a top 4 forward or top 4 defenseman at this point. And I even believe probably could make it to a top 2 pair. It's a question of who between him and Sanheim actually becomes the guy that will play long term with Ivan Provorov.
Yeah. So they're down 1-0. The Islanders are rolling all 4 lines so well. What will the Flyers need to do to really beat the Islanders here? I actually, even before the series started, I picked Islanders. I have a feeling they're playing really, really well right now.
No, it's not a bad pick, Peter. I picked the Flyers in 7, but I think it's a 7-game series.
Yeah.
I think that I think the 4-0 loss is a little deceiving because other than the first period yesterday, I thought that the Flyers played really well. I think the second period, they absolutely dominated the Islanders. And then until the Islanders really got that third goal in the third period, I thought the Flyers were the better team up until that point as well. And then, of course, there was the fourth goal, the empty netter. But here's what I think has to happen, and they have to do a multiple-step thing here against the Islanders. Number one is they got to take what they were doing in the second period and just kind of ramp that up even a little bit more. They were just taking shots from anywhere, okay? They were just getting shots on Varlamov. Not just getting the shots on goal, but get people into that greasy area in front of the goal and get rebounds or get tips or whatever you need to do. Distract the goalie, set a screen, maybe bump them here and there. Like, do what you got to do to kind of, create havoc in front of the net and kind of throw him off a little bit. And secondly, I think what you have to do is I think you have to start to try and play a game, a little bit of a mind game with the Islanders and play a little bit with a little bit more of an edge. Try and get under their skin a little bit. Try and get them off their, because if you do and then they take a penalty, now you get the power play out there. Not that the power play has been great, but it's an opportunity to go against the Islanders when they're not clogging the middle with 4 guys, right, and chasing the puck with 1. So it's an opportunity to really kind of get some offense going at a time when you don't have to play them 5-on-5. So I think that that's really the two-step process. And one other thing I want to add in here is I'm pretty confident that we're going to see Brian Elliott one start in this series for the Flyers. And I think that's because of the way that the schedule was put out. And I don't understand what the NHL was thinking, but they put two potential back-to-backs with the Flyers and the Islanders. And not to mention the first 4 games are being played in the span of 5.5 days. I mean, we will be through 4 games by 2:30 Saturday afternoon. Okay, that's really, really a lot. It's a lot to ask your goalie to play all that time. So I think you're going to see, Carter Hart's going to play game 2, but I wouldn't be surprised with a back-to-back and then another game at noon on Saturday that we see Brian Elliott in game 3. Not as a knock on Hart, but just because of the timing of everything.
Yeah.
If the Islanders do the same, I think the advantage goes to the Flyers with backup goalies. And it's weird to sit here and say who has an advantage at backup goalie, but in the way this schedule breaks out, I think you have to look at it. And I think Elliott is a better option than Thomas Greiss. So I think that's an edge for the Flyers. And secondly, although both teams roll 4 lines, I think the Flyers have more offensive talent further down the lineup than the Islanders do. And so when you're playing this many games in a row and guys start to get tired a little bit, you might get an opportunity to score that weird goal or that odd 4th line goal might come more likely from the Flyers, I think, than it would from New York. So I think that there are a couple of advantages that the Flyers can grab going forward, but I'll tell you, they have to win one of the next 2 for sure. They can't get down 3-0. If they do, it's over at that point. But I really think that it's important to win one of the next 2 for sure, and then focus on the last 3 and try and win, what you need to get out of those last 3 games. So probably 2 wins in those last 3. So I mean, I think that's how they have to compartmentalize this a little bit. And if they do, I still think they can win the series. But it's certainly going to go at least 6 in my mind, and probably 7.
Yeah. I think in terms of, again, going back towards that bubble, this is why they compacted this schedule so much. And even you noticed between this round and the previous round, there was no time wasted. Whereas in the past, when we do have only like 5 or 6 game series, we usually wait still in terms of the schedule for that 7 games, even though it's not happening anymore, to potentially be done, and then they start the next series. So they've really compressed it, I guess, to hurry up and get it done and maybe start preparing for the next season, as well as get everybody back home with their families.
Yeah, and I think that the one negative that I haven't brought up for the Flyers is that, they come off of a game like game 1 against the Islanders on Monday, and they don't have an opportunity to practice because they need the off day, knowing that they have 2 games in a row coming up. So there's no on ice on Tuesday for them. So really the only practice time they get is assuming that they take a morning skate on Wednesday with 3:00 start time. So who knows? Like, will they go out for a morning skate or not? And if so, what will they implement? Anything new? Everything's being done in a classroom setting, like by video and in the hotel. Is it as easy to implement that just talking about it, or do you actually have to get on the ice and practice it? I mean, and so that could be a negative for the Flyers as they try to juggle lines and find what works. It might take actual game time to figure that out, as opposed to a practice to figure that out.
Yeah, you can find him on Twitter at SanAndPhilly. Anthony, thanks for coming on the show again.
Hey, Peter, anytime, my friend.
Let's go to Long Island and talk some Isles. Now we have on the show Christian Arnold. He's an editor-in-chief of New York Islanders Hockey Now. That's NYI Hockey Now on Twitter. And a co-host of Hockey Night New York. You can find him on Twitter at C_Arnold01. Christian, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
All right. So the Islanders blasted through the 2018 Stanley Cup champions. Trotz has already proven how great he is as a coach with the previous team, and now defeating his old team in the first round. Man, is there not enough of these veteran coaches that, I don't know why the Caps let him go, but that's just amazing. Fantastic. He's been great.
I think you're not the only one. And obviously hindsight is 2020, right? Because I think there was a certain point in that season too where it looked like, that team maybe wasn't in the greatest spot either under Trotz. But again, hindsight is always 2020. But surely the Capitals have to be looking back on that and going, what were we thinking? Todd Reardon comes in, he was, a highly touted coach coming into that position. And he just got outschooled by the guy who was his mentor, basically. Barry Trotz has had an answer really for every problem the Islanders have had this season, last season, and during the postseason. So, he's just a master tactician when you look at what he does, and really he gets the best out of his guys. Because the New York Islanders, you look at the team that he took to the Stanley Cup championship in 2018. That is a very talented team. The Washington Capitals had. The New York Islanders, in all due respect, I think a lot of people would admit this, are not nearly as talented. But what they do have is they have a lot of guys that work hard, and everyone has bought into the Barry Trotz system, and it's absolutely paid off. And I think that's probably one of the greatest strengths with some of these veteran coaches is that you have these guys who buy in and believe in what these guys are preaching. Even just look at Columbus. John Tortorella was another great example of that. That was a very, a Columbus team that certainly had its flaws, and he got a lot out of them considering the circumstances. So you look at guys like that, they certainly have the ability more than anything else to get those guys in the locker room to believe in their system, believe in their strategy, and get them to give them their all.
For sure. Now they're matched up with two veteran coaches in this series against the Flyers with the Islanders. So on the other bench, you got a coach who's veteran as well, but also a team that can kind of be a little bit more versatile, because you saw at the end of the season, the Flyers were a little bit more offensive. And then that first round, they played very defensive. So this is going to be interesting how they match up now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you saw a little bit of that in the first game the other night, because the Islanders certainly were the better team in the first and third period. And then the second period, the Philadelphia Flyers came flying out of the gate, and absolutely were the better team in that part of the game. So the Islanders got a lot of great goaltending. This is going to be a really fun goaltending duel. When you look at it, Carter Hart obviously is one of the better young goaltenders in the National Hockey League, and he's had a tremendous playoffs. And Semyon Varlamov too has had a great playoff. But more to your point, it'll be fun and greasy because both of these teams kind of have that versatile style. The Islanders are not an offensive team by any stretch of the imagination, but they certainly have the ability to do it here in certain games. And obviously, some of these postseason games have been a little more high scoring than they maybe actually were. There's a couple empty nets. The Islanders got rolling in certain points, but the Islanders have that ability to kind of be, once they get into the transition game, they can be a bit of an offensive team. They can surprise you a little bit. And they certainly have done that at certain points during the playoffs. And other times they get into their rhythm where they are a strong defensive style team where they'll choke out your offense. And then that's how they create the transition opportunities. So, you look at the Flyers, they're not really that much different in that regard too. They certainly have the ability to do the same thing. And I think that's what makes this series so interesting. And it should be a lot of fun. We've already seen it be very entertaining in the first game, and I can only imagine that it's going to get more entertaining as the series progresses.
That's for sure. You're talking about they have offense. Well, it sure seems like they do. They've got at least 6 players with 3 goals or more, a lot of guys with multiple goals. And then, of course, a standout is Beauvillier. He's really exploded so far these playoffs. He already has about 6 goals. Is he the one to really lead this team offensively to take them really far in these playoffs?
Yeah, Anthony Beauvillier has certainly come into his own in the playoffs, and I think that I think a lot of people on Long Island see all the potential because you look at his history since he's gotten to the NHL. He's had a lot of big game moments when you look back, especially last season, parts of this season. You look back, talking about the Flyers, he was instrumental in an earlier comeback. The Islanders were down 3-0 in a November game against the Flyers in Philadelphia, and he led the charge offensively to get the team to rally to a shootout win. But I think people have seen flash of it. Now it's the consistency. Now you're seeing him consistently do this night in, night out. And I think that's really a credit to the guys on that line. Brock Nelson is absolutely a phenomenal line mate to have. He's been offensively great too for the New York Islanders. And then really when you put Josh Bailey on that line as well, Josh Bailey may be one of the most underrated playmakers in the National Hockey League because he really gets the best out of the guys he's been on lines with. So Anthony Beauvillier has had just a standout season. And when you put him on a line with a guy like Josh Bailey, and we've seen it a couple of times in the playoffs, that's only going to help. But Anthony Beauvillier is playing with a lot of confidence. He's leading the charge, as you said. But really, the Islanders have that ability to roll 4 lines, and that's kind of opened up a lot of these guys to have that success individually as well as a team. Because even when you expand that, you look at guys like J.G. Pageau, who's also had a very good playoff series for the Islanders. And it's really in part because the Islanders have a healthy lineup, so they can roll 4 lines. So the pressure isn't necessarily on these certain guys to do everything. Instead, it's spread out, and it frees up these guys to play a little more open hockey. And as Beauvillier has written on a stick, it allows him to go out there and have fun. And I think that's really what has led to a lot of his success too, is he's just going out there and he's having fun. And it's hard not to have fun when you're winning playoff games.
Yeah, that pass by Bailey, I think, to Brock Nelson in that game 1 was fantastic. One guy I thought was interesting to watch is Nick Leddy, because he was considered maybe more of that offensive puck-moving type defenseman, but I feel that he's really found his veteran game in playing a solid defensive game now. Just his structure seems better, and he's much better back there.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is going to come off as I'm taking a shot at Johnny Boychuk, and I'm not. I'm really not. But you look at the stability of Andy Greene playing alongside him. He has made that tandem so much better. And it's really allowed Nick Leddy, I think, to kind of hone in his defensive style of play and really morph into, again, the Barry Trotz system. And when you have a guy like Andy Greene on your wing, who's been basically, he's as a veteran as it comes in the NHL. He's been in every type of situation. There is a certain level of comfort and confidence that you have, I'm sure, playing alongside him, that you can play a little more confidently. And Andy Greene's going to be there, and he's going to make some of those big defensive plays if you need him to, or he's going to be there to help you out and point you in the right direction. And I think we've seen that. I think we've really seen part of that as the reason why we've seen such a quick maturation in his defensive style of play. And that's obviously benefited the Islanders. They have 3 defensive lines that they can really trust in their own end, and they can kind of be weapons at both ends. Like you said, Nick Leddy is known as an offensive defenseman, and now you can have that comfort level knowing he's a bit more of a defensive defenseman now too, especially with a guy like Andy Greene out there that kind of evens things out.
Yeah, Andy Greene, when did he become 57 years old?
It's really great. There was a lot of great Twitter memes yesterday. Andy Greene basically looks like he was on the 1980s Island Dynasty team. So, I mean, he's just become, you talk about folk heroes on Long Island. Andy Greene has quickly become a folk hero on Long Island with Islander fans because of the stature he's brought and the play he's had. He's been one of the guys who's really come into the lineup and just held his own. And you kind of expect it because he's a veteran, but at the same time, that's tough to do in the playoffs, in the postseason, and in a situation like this, it's tough to do. And he's done it with such ease and with such confidence and with such, grace, I guess you could say, that the Islanders, they haven't missed a beat. And it goes back to the defensive depth that they have now, which they didn't have for a large portion of the season with all the injuries. But Andy Greene, my goodness, who would have saw Andy Greene becoming the folk hero that he is on Long Island, especially game 1 against the Flyers. He has a goal. He has that big save on Claude Giroux in the first period as well. He's kind of just doing it all, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I've got the Islanders to win this series in 6. Do you think that's kind of the way things are trending, or are the Flyers really going to try to flip the script here? I don't know.
Look, I mean, we saw the Island. I usually I'd agree with you, but I think if anything, this postseason has shown that the Islanders are as tough a team as anybody. And you look at the way they played the Capitals. You look at the way they played the Panthers, I should say, the Florida Panthers, and those series are all series I expected to go the full length. I expected the Florida series to go 5. I expected the Capital series to go 7. I have been dead wrong. The Islanders have played maybe, one full bad game of hockey in the entire postseason, and that was in Game 4 against the Capitals. And even then, the resiliency that this team has shown, and they've found every which way to win these games. So I don't know. They win the series. I could see it being 5 games just because of the way things have played out for the Islanders, how they've kind of stuck to this workman mentality, and they've just gone out and played their game and played really well. So I think 5 games. I think they win the series. You're right, but I think it's 5 games. I also think it's very interesting now. You're seeing a lot of teams and other people who watch the game certainly take notice of the Islanders and speak with a lot of respect about the team, because certainly that hasn't been the case in a long, long time.
Yep. Again, you can find him on Twitter at C_Arnold01. Christian, thank you for coming back on the show.
Of course, happy to do it anytime.
Glad I got to cover some of those teams for all you listeners. It's interesting to hear how the schedule is different and the mental game is even more important for players in the bubble. Next week, we'll go over more in depth on some of those other series. Check out all our new episodes every Wednesday. Go to JablamSports.com to see all our podcasts and even game notes for every episode. You'll get info, links, and all our guests on all the things we mentioned on the show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app. Share this episode with 3 friends. If you want to contact us, or if you have any questions or ideas on the show, you can follow me on Twitter at Russia98 or the entire team at Jablam Sports. You can also use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. You can also contact us on our website page, jablamsports.com/contact. Also, if you like wrestling, go check our new wrestling podcast, Pro Wrestling Explode, presented by our team at Jablam Sports. It's where Joey Pepperoni, Miranda, and I get into AEW, WWE, and we recap, analyze recent matches, storylines, pay-per-views, and what's in wrestling news. Thank you, everyone. Shout out. Well, this week's shout out is for Radhika Sharma. She's a great anchor for Focus Punjabi on Omni Television. The energy, hard work, and passion she brings every single day really rubs off on everybody around her, all the crew and everybody that works in the building. Going to work and working with her makes me want to work harder and keep going. Thank you, Radhika. And to every one of our followers, I'm giving you a virtual hug. Stay healthy, listen, be yourself, and stay strong.